I'll take care of that right now. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anita Nielsen, and I'm the Senior Director for Annual and Plan Giving at Toronto General and Western Hospital Foundation. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the Spring 2014 Behind the Scenes Lecture. We're so happy to see so many people turn out today on this beautiful, beautiful spring day. Thanks for making the time in your schedule to spend it with us. It's hard to believe that we're already in our 8th year of our behind the scenes lectures, and we've really been trying to cover topics that are of interest to our patients and their families, and to have a wide variety of information that we hope is helpful to you and interesting. We've covered topics from transplantation to ophthalmology, arthritis, surgical innovation, and today cardiology. And throughout this time, there have been so many advancements and innovations that have taken place. And truly, they would not be possible without our family of donors who so generously support all of the work that our physicians and surgeons and researchers are doing every day at our hospitals. So thank you so much on behalf of all of us at the Foundation and at UHN for your generous support. Hopefully, you've had an opportunity to read this spring edition of Report on Your Support, which is our newsletter to donors. And this year on the cover is Dr. Heather Ross and her patient, Mr. Al Dickstein. If you haven't received your copy, we do have copies in the lobby, so I hope you'll pick one up on your way out. And Mr. Dickstein being one of our Dr. Ross's grateful patients, and we're so delighted that he's going to be joining us here today. He recently celebrated his 75th birthday and is going to talk about his experience as a cardiac patient, and is here also with his wife Mitzi and son Jeff, so thank you for coming. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Heather Ross. Dr. Ross is a professor of medicine at the University of Toronto and director of the Ted Rogers Center of Excellence in Heart Function. She also holds the Ted Rogers and Family Chair in Heart Function and is the head of the MSH UHN Heart Failure Program. She's also the director of the Cardiac Transplant Program at Toronto General Hospital and the director of education for the University of Toronto Transplant Institute. Dr. Ross received her medical degree from the University of British Columbia and completed her cardiology training at Dalhousie. She completed a postdoctoral fellowship in cardiac transplantation at Stanford University and earned her master's degree in bioethics from the University of Toronto. Dr. Ross has served on the Canadian Cardiovascular Society Council for 5 years, 3 years on the executive, and on the board of the Canadian Cardiovascular Society Academy as the Secretary-Treasurer. She's currently on the executive of the Heart Failure Society of America and is the Vice President of the Canadian Cardiovascular Society. Dr. Ross has more than 200 peer-reviewed publications and has won numerous teaching awards. Inspired every day by her patients, she has taken on the mission to raise awareness and support for advanced heart failure and transplant research through her Test Your Limits initiatives, which you are going to hear more about today. Some of you may know that Dr. Ross also sings and plays saxophone with a band made up of mostly transplant doctors called the Marginal Donors. And they've performed at a number of charity events, including the legendary Palais Royal and Toronto's Gladstone Hotel. Since 2006, the Test Your Limits team that Dr. Ross leads has traveled to the ends of the earth to raise over $2 million to support advanced heart failure and transplant research. And that brings us to this afternoon's presentation, aptly titled, going to the nth degree to improve patient care. Dr. Ross is going to share with you what it is about the patient experience that inspires her and professionals just like her to work continuously to improve quality of life for those living with chronic conditions. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Heather Ross.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I am looking forward to telling you a little bit about our adventures. We're going to just get the talk lined up here. For my parents who are in the audience, there's a couple of graphic slides, so we'll just try not to get them too upset by discussing some of these rather ridiculous adventures that I've been on. I want to take you on a bit of a journey, and I want to start by where the whole process started for me, which was in 2004. In 2004, a colleague of mine from the Montreal Heart Institute asked me, he's French-Canadian, so the accent, he said, did you want to spend 3 weeks in a high alpine desert with 21 men on Viagra? And I said, yeah, that's a first. And we went down to Bolivia to climb this mountain. This is Mount Sajama in Bolivia. This is the largest mountain in Bolivia. It's the second largest mountain behind Aconcagua in South America. It is 6,500 meters. And we went down with Sylvain Bedard here, who's a heart transplant recipient from Montreal, and Dave Smith, who's a kidney transplant recipient from Edmonton. It was my first really big adventure, and it really was an amazing experience. I crossed 5,000 meters for the first time, and at the summit camp at 5,800 meters, so effectively the top of Kilimanjaro, I ran into some problem with headaches, and unfortunately had to come down. But on that trip, Sylvain crossed over the 6,000 meter mark, which was a world record for a heart transplant patient. And Dave summited, which had never been done by any kidney transplant patient. And it was an incredible experience. I came back from that trip and I had lunch with Ian Delaney, and he said to me, well, what are you going to do next? And over that lunch, I said, you know, I have always wanted to go to the Antarctic. So when you think about these things, it's always important to remember that a goal without a plan is just a wish. And in thinking about how to do this, he said, how are you going to make this happen? What are you going to do with this? And I said, we're going to just blow this up. Michelle had done an amazing job with the trip to Bolivia in terms of getting local press, but I thought we could do something much, much bigger. And so in thinking about that and thinking about where we were with our heart failure and transplant program, I want to take you, and I'm going to position these things along as I talk to you today. So at that time, back in 2006, we'd recruited this young hotshot cardiologist, Diego Delgado. We'd had an incredible gift from the Fenwick family to establish the Fenwick Professorship, which provided us with some sustainable funding for the program. But really our focus at that time for the heart function program were on patients with symptoms of heart failure and those with advanced heart failure. And in thinking about how we really want to approach heart failure, that's probably not the sort of inclusive way that we want to look at it. We have to remember that cardiovascular disease is very common in Canada, that heart failure is effectively an epidemic. 5% of Canadians have a problem with their heart function and don't know it. 1 in 5 people over the age of 40 will develop heart failure, and there are 500,000 Canadians who have active heart failure, and the prognosis remains very poor. So after a diagnosis of heart failure, the average life expectancy is 2.1 years. And if you're working in that field, that's pretty unacceptable. So in thinking about how we could do this program, we developed the Test Your Limits program. And the main purposes, and these have followed through over these 8 years, but the main purposes really were to raise awareness for heart health and heart disease, promote healthy living, healthy lifestyles, raise awareness for organ donation and transplantation, get the message out, have people sign their organ donor cards. And importantly for our program at that time was really to look at fundraising for the program. And some of the big reasons for that were that at that time, OHIP did not fund mechanical hearts. They were funded solely through generosity and gifts from donors, and they were there to save many lives. And we knew that they could have a huge impact, but we had no way to fund that program other than through gifts. We had no formal fellowship program, and the ministry doesn't recognize that type of postdoctoral training, so there was no access to funding to establish a fellowship program. We knew that if we really want to make advance, we want to get early on. We want to understand the science of heart failure, and we still wanted to work on our clinical research. So that's where we started in 2006. So what better place to go than the Vinson Massif in the Antarctic? I'm sure you can think of a lot better places to go, but from my perspective, this is one of the 7 summits. So along with Everest and the other big mountains, it's the tallest mountain on the continent of the Antarctic. Only 800 individuals have ever made the summit. It tends to be the last mountain climb because of the extreme weather. It's a desert. There's only 18 inches of snow a year, and the summertime it's minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. In the winter it's minus 120 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's cold. This is it here. You can see the peak right there, and so it was a fairly arduous journey to get there, and in fact, because of the challenges with actually landing on the Antarctic with planes, we had been delayed in Punta Arenas, and our trip had gotten compressed from a 13-day trip to a 6-day trip, which becomes quite relevant. If we want to get the message out there, it's all very well to say that I can do it, but we want to make sure that people understand that anybody can do it. And so the real man of the hour and the man whose story threads through the entire talk today is Dale Shipham. And Dale is a heart transplant recipient. He had a viral infection of his heart, so something he had no control over. Firefighter, went back to firefighting after the transplant. And we put the call out that this trip was going to happen. I didn't want to volunteer anyone myself. I felt it was important because there was some risk involved that whoever wanted to come because it was their choice. And Dale stepped up and said, absolutely. So we had an incredible amount of training that went into this trip, and ultimately, it's important to think about these things. This would be what my mother would say to me, of course. But we made our way to the continent of the Antarctic, and we started a base camp that's at about 8,000 feet. This is Pat Murphy. She's one of the anesthetists here who came with us. Barry Blanchard, who's one of Canada's most foremost climbers. We're sorting out food into man days and tent days of food. Mr. Ian Delaney was foolish enough to come on this trip, and Dale sorting out the fuel, because you need the fuel to melt the snow, to cook your food, to make your water. Sorting everything out. 50 pounds on our back in the pack, 50 pounds in the sled, and away we go. One of the really interesting things about the Antarctic is that there's no way to get a sense of depth perception. There's no trees, there's no buildings, there's nothing to get any sort of scale of relativity. So everything looks very close and ends up being actually really very far. And this is us coming along the trail. The trails are mapped out quite carefully because there's crevasses on either side and you don't want to spend any time in those. And we made our way snake-like up the mountain, camping along the way, but because the trip had been compressed, we didn't have the opportunity for any rest days, which is actually very important when you lay siege to a mountain. Just from a perception perspective here, there's people, these are people, and these are people. This is a 3,000-foot head wall that's at 40 degrees that we climbed. That's Pat, those are people there. Again, really hard to get a sense. You probably can barely even see them on the screen because of the issue. This is to prove I was there. I'm the photographer. This is the summit camp. Very cold at this point. You can see all of our gear on and bundled in for the night. 24 hours of sunlight. Got up the next day, which was day 5, and tried to make our way to the summit. That's the summit camp. This is Shin. Vinson is higher than Shin, so that's what we have to accomplish during the day, but coming in this direction. So we're actually coming this way in this photo. And then a lot further up, these are people. And you can see how Shin has sort of gone to the background and dropped down a little bit in terms of its height. Some of you know the story of what happened on that mountain, and I always get a little emotional at this point, but I got quite sick on the mountain and developed high-altitude pulmonary edema, something that my patients have all the time with heart failure. And it was actually Dale that helped get me down the mountain. I had to walk down the mountain because there aren't any rescue services available, but Dale carried my pack, and we walked down the mountain all through the night. It was a 36-hour day of climbing that day. The only picture that I have of Vincent is if you look in my goggles, because I had such low oxygen, I never thought to turn around and take a picture of the mountain. I just wasn't really thinking clearly. But we got within 200 vertical meters of the mountain, and Dale was fine. So I'm the heart doctor, and I'm the one with the trouble, and Dale was fine, and he could have summited. And he said, I came here for the journey, and he came down with me. A remarkable man. So that was the first trip. Pretty monumental experience for me, I have to say. Came back from that trip, and we had raised a fair amount of money, and it allowed us to recruit another young hotshot cardiologist by the name of Mike McDonald. And what he does is teach. He's an educator. He is a gifted educator. And the fundraising that we were able to do with that program allowed us to start having a consistent fellowship program, which is a huge thing for us when we think about how we manage patients and look after patients, and also how we do research and the opportunity to do research. It also allowed us to fund more of our mechanical circulatory support program, and so we started to already see this growth in terms of our clinical program. And what Mike has done with the fellowship program is made us the world's largest fellowship program in heart failure. We have 20 to 25 people a year from around the world who apply to come and work with us, and usually 5 to 7 people a year get accepted. We offer master's and PhD training as well, and these are just some of the stars from where the people from all over the world have come to train with us. One of the best minds I'm going to come and talk about is addressing this issue. So one of the biggest challenges for us when we have patients with heart failure is trying to figure out what the right decision is for the right patient and at the right time. So we don't want to offer a treatment that has risk too early, and we don't want to miss an opportunity to save somebody's life. And most of that is based on the issue of prognosis. So one of the young hotshots that we recruited to do a PhD with us and is now doing her clinical fellowship is Dr. Carolina Alba, and she is from Argentina. And she has made it her goal to understand prognosis and how to better predict prognosis. And as we say in our world, basically all she's done is published in the best journals that we have. So she has been incredibly effective, and she's completing her clinical program with us right now. So she's been with us now, I think, 6 years. So we have to move on, because that's still not enough in terms of trying to take the program to the level that we want to take it. So I had lunch with Mr. Ian Delaney, and he sort of said, well, where do you want to go now? And I said, had problems with a high-altitude pulmonary edema at Vincent. In 2008, we went to Nepal, and I had problems with high-altitude cerebral edema, so I kind of like to stay at sea level. So let's go to the North Pole. So the North Pole, as you know, is on the Arctic Ocean. It's on that floating mass, and the current is going. You're at 90 degrees north latitude, and the nearest land is 450 miles away. The water is extremely deep, and the ice is not very thick. And what you do is you spend your days skiing over the not very thick ice, over the incredibly deep ocean, until you get to 90 degrees north latitude. There's only one sunrise and sunset per year. Very romantic. And we had to do some training for this as well.
For one of the most dangerous elements they can face in the Arctic, open water.
Grab the bottom of the pole, grab the base of the pole. Yep. Grab the other one.
So that's cold.
Yep. And kick your feet up on the surface. There you go. And roll. There you go.
So part of the training was we had to show that we could get out of the water if we actually skied and the ice broke through and we fell in. And all of us had to do this. This was in northern Minnesota in January. And then when you get out, you rolled in the snow because the snow actually takes the water off of your body. That's obviously me, not my best picture maybe. We flew through Norway to this place, which is called Borneo, which is the Russian science station that's erected each year. They fly over, drop tractors, hope they don't fall through the ice, and then plow a runway for the plane, which is a jet. And then they establish a science station there where they do scientific research, and it's the base camp for the trip, so it's where all the emergency teams are. And it's where this is, which is the last one for quite a while. So we started on this trip, and this is a little different now. No pack, but we've got a sled, and we have 100 pounds in our sled, and we're pulling the sled every day. And in the sled is, again, it's the food that you need and the fuel to melt the snow, to deal with the water, to make the cooking, and to survive. And everything is mapped out fairly carefully. We know how far we have to get every day. And you go and you ski for 10 hours a day, and then you set up camp. And this was the first day, and we had covered a great distance. We're skiing the last degree. I did the math. We're going to be at the pole in 6 days. Woohoo. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be incredible. I'm so happy. It's going to be so good. And then we had this. So these are known as open leads. This is open water, and you want to try to go over it because you don't know how long it's going to be if you have to try to go around it. So this is Keith trying to figure out if we can go over it. These are sleds and on open water that we would walk over. And he's trying to see if we can ski over this next section here. So we've had a little pause because it's a very long lead, and we might be 2-3 hours trying to go around it. And he's trying to figure out if we can go across. So he's checking, and if you over here in a minute, you'll see Dirk, and he's got the emergency rope there in case Keith goes in. And Keith's taking his pole now. He's going to check it's safe. Looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. Looks solid, nice. Yep. Maybe we can do this. Looks pretty good. And my favorite moment is right about now. And that's Dale laughing. So clearly we couldn't get across there, and we had to go around, and that was a bit of a challenge for us. The second challenge that we had is something that we call the Arctic Treadmill. So you go to sleep at night, and the current takes you away from the pole, and you spend 3 hours the next day trying to get to where you went to bed at night before you can actually continue to move forward. If the current's going in your favor, of course, you're going to get to the pole much faster, but we had the current fairly consistently going against us. So we ended up covering more than 110 miles by the time it was done to cover effectively 60 miles. Every day we would ski for an hour and then take a break. Everything is synchronized because hypothermia is quite easy to have happen, always with your back to the wind. In those brief 10-minute breaks, you would have something to eat, something to drink, ablutions if you needed it, and then you would go ahead. And that's what every day looked like. This was one of the other challenges that we faced at the end of the trip, which was a gale force storm that we were pinned down by for 60 hours. This just gives you an idea of what things look like outside the tent. 60 hours later, with almost no food or fuel left, the weather thankfully broke, and this is what our camp looked like. We were mostly under the snow, and this is how far we had actually drifted in 60 hours with the Arctic current. So really dramatic period as well. So 60 hours in a tent, everything gets done in the tent, everything. I got to know Keith, who was my tent mate, quite well. And here we are. You can't see it projected here, but it says 90 degrees north, and we made it to the pole, and again, a fairly emotional moment to have actually achieved it, and a success, a very big adventure and a very big success. And that allowed us to actually bring in another PhD nurse by the name of Jane McIver, who did her PhD with us in bioethics with a focus on quality of life. And this was really an innovative thing for us to do because much of what's done in heart failure is geared at survival. And I've been very interested in actually how patients feel and what it's like to have heart failure. And maybe that stems from the experience that I had in Vincent, I don't know, but we became quite interested in better understanding how to measure quality of life, how patients decide on what's important for quality of life, and thinking about ways to improve quality of life. And this is an area that is often relegated to after we look at other studies looking at survival. It was at this time that we became a formal center of excellence in heart function, and that was through a very major gift from the Rogers family, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And that also allowed us to further increase the fellowship program and the research side of our program. When I look at the quality of life, again, Jane has just done nothing but publish in the best journals and to try to advance the field, and I think we've gained quite an international reputation in terms of understanding, measuring, evaluating, and improving quality of life. So, what do you do when you have one pole? You need a matching set. So, I had lunch with Mr. Delaney, and we said, well, you know what, let's go do the South Pole. The last time on the Antarctic wasn't necessarily the most successful trip, but let's try this again. So, here we go. The South Pole is at 90 degrees south. Everything is up when you're there. I personally love this description: featureless, barren, windswept, icy. And I think for me, the concern that I had a fair bit of was the altitude. So it doesn't sound very high when you think about it, but the air is quite stretched at the poles. It's much thinner, and it behaves more like 11 or 12,000 feet. The biggest issue is, unlike going to Vail or somewhere like that, where you go up the mountain, if you get into trouble, you come down the mountain, the South Pole is a plateau, and as a result, if you run into issues with the altitude, there is no mountain to go down. And so, in effect, you have to wait until a plane can get in to rescue you. So I have to say, for me, there was a lot of churning stuff going on inside, thinking about this trip. It's also, by temperature, incredibly cold, quite different than the North Pole. The North Pole is not as cold by temperature, but very damp because you're just above sea level, and there's no tent relief because the sun is only just above the horizon when you go. If it's too high, there's no ice, so you can't ski. If it's too low, it's actually just too cold. So it's only a little bit up off the horizon, but as a result, you don't get any radiant energy coming from the sun in your tent. So your tent temperature is exactly the same as it is outside. The South Pole, the sun is higher, and you get amazing tent relief. So in fact, it was up at 15 degrees in the tent when we had the sun directly on us. Much, much more tolerable that way. And it's a dry cold, much easier to tolerate than the damp. This is the blue ice runway at the Union Glacier. So this is what the 4-engine jumbo jet lands on. So obviously no brakes are used, and it takes quite a little while for it to stop. We left Union Glacier by way of a refurbished, stunning Canadian DC-3 with Canadian bush pilots. And this is the team. Somehow or other, I managed to sucker Diego Delgado into coming with us. I'm not sure he's forgiven me yet. We fly over the first mountain range, and we land on the plateau. And at this point, the plane takes off and leaves you there, and we're at the last degree. This is sort of gives an idea of where we've come from that day, and this gives an idea of what it actually is like if you're standing there. So it's kind of lonely. Quite different again from the North Pole, because in the North Pole, the plates of ice push, and you get 2- and 3-story ice formations and open water, and there's birds. We didn't see any bears, which I was happy about, but in the South Pole, it's flat, and every hour of every day, it looks exactly the same. And that's incredibly challenging when you're pulling 100 pounds for 10 hours a day. This is me. I know it doesn't look much like it. We had significant wind, which is another challenge in the south. So because of the cold temperature and the wind, frostbite is a very major problem. One of our group had snow blindness. I got frost nip on my thighs on one day it was -50, and we had a full headwind. And despite all of my clothes, I still frost nipped my thighs. So we had to be very, very cautious, and everybody looks out for everybody else to make sure that everything is covered. This is what we did during the day, so 10 hours of this. It's slow if you're a skier, and it's slow because you're at altitude and you're pulling 100 pounds. And that's what it looks like, just 10 hours a day, every day. So we would pull for an hour to 2 hours. By the end of the trip, we were able to pull in 2-hour periods because we were more acclimatized. And then again, you'd have your 10 to 15 minute break, have something to eat and drink, and then away you went. When we got to camp, we would actually, again, because of the coldness outside, most things were done in quite a solitary way. So there were 14 of us on this trip, but each tent functioned entirely independently. And you can see we would come into camp, we would dig out our vestibule, and then start the process of melting water, which was about 2 hours every night and about an hour and a half every morning, cook our meals. So it looked like an hour and a half to 2 hours in the morning to get breakfast food and break camp, 10 hours of pulling, 2 to 3 hours in the evening to make dinner and set camp, and then the rest of the time you spent in your bag trying to get some sleep. But this was the payoff. This is skiing up to South Pole Station, and that is the US science station there. We're coming up here to the ceremonial pole. Just a truly remarkable feeling to ski up to that. And despite having been told by my mother to never do this, I got my lips stuck on the ceremonial ball. Mom, you were supposed to do better than that for me. This is Keith, my tent mate at the North Pole and at the South Pole. And another, I think, incredibly successful trip for us. Where are we now with the program? That trip also allowed us to leverage another individual with an incredibly huge brain. This is Dr. Phyllis Pelea. And she was recruited, and her expertise is in basic research. So she's where the future is for us. She's the one that's going to identify novel genes that elaborate and allow us to look at new pathways for why heart failure happens, to look at new ways to treat people. Because we're doing what we're doing now, and we're doing it reasonably well, but we don't win the battle as much as we want. So we need to be looking at trying to discover new genes, pathways, novel ways for us to actually manage. So she's been a huge recruitment to our program. At this point, we are now a center of excellence. We are the hub for a referral of more than 8 million people in Ontario, and these are some of the centers that refer into us. Our volumes have just continued to grow, partly success and partly a bit of a challenge as we try to manage the growth of the patients that we're seeing. One of the things that we know, though, and sorry for this being quite so provocative, but we don't have enough hearts to go around. So if we're really going to win the battle with heart failure, it's not going to be based on transplant. Transplant is the most amazing treatment. But as somebody once said, using transplant to treat heart failure is like using the lottery to treat poverty. So we need to do a better job than just this. And this is where we really believe for us one of the biggest futures is, which is looking at mechanical hearts. And many of you may be familiar with Barney Clark, who received the first mechanical heart back in 1982. It was a huge device, you can see here. He lived for 112 days, tethered to a massive system that weighed 400 pounds. And this is where we are now. This is one of the early devices that we had, the HeartMate 1. This is the HeartMate 2, which does most of our work. And the HeartWare, these are the two devices that we're using the most. And we are about to hopefully do first in man with the new HeartMate devices. This is the HeartMate X and the HeartMate 3, which we're hoping to be implanting shortly. And these are the new HeartWare devices, and they're basically the size of a Duracell C battery. So when we think about something that was 400 pounds and the device itself was huge to something the size of a Duracell C battery, you can see why we get pretty excited. Because this is an issue of, if I have the pump, I can implant it. And now OHIP actually covers device implants for us for bridge to transplant and bridge to candidacy, so we have some potential to continue to grow this program. So this is where we are now, and wouldn't be here without the Fenwicks, the Rogers, Mr. Delaney, and countless other people that have actually made this program happen. So I can't tell you how grateful I am for that. Where we are now is expanding basic research to understand not only how altered genes change structure and function, but also more basic research into the patients who actually have symptomatic heart failure. We have the largest clinical heart failure program in the country and the largest fellowship program in the world. We have a huge platform of research on quality of life. We have just opened, and if you read The Sun recently, you know that we have started a supportive care clinic that is a clinic between heart failure and palliative care for those patients that we can't turn the clock back on who are going to die from heart failure. And this is a huge innovative program for us. We are continuing to grow our mechanical circulatory support, and for the first time 18 months ago, we did more mechanical hearts than transplants. And that's going to be the future for us. The transplant volume will stay there, but we need more. We need to be able to do more, and that's really where the mechanical heart program is going to help us. And even more so, if we think about where I want to go, I want to be going in this direction. The natural history of heart failure is in this direction. That's just not on. And we want to really figure out how to actually move in this direction. So I had lunch with Mr. Delaney. There's a theme here because Mr. Delaney has funded all of our trips so that we've been able to use the trips to leverage fundraising, and all of the money that we've therefore raised have gone directly to the program, and he's been a huge supporter for us, and I'm very grateful for that. The next trip is Bhutan, and we are off to do the Snowman Trek. I'm not going to talk too much about it because my mom's in the audience, and I think it's probably best that we don't talk too much about it, but we're very excited in September to be heading down to Bhutan. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, and I'm incredibly grateful for the support of the foundation. Wouldn't be here without it. Now what I'd like to do, and I'm a little worried about what he's going to say, but what I'd like to do is to have Al Dickstein come on up and say a few words. Al. Should I stay or am I going to need to sit down?
No, you can sit down. Oh, okay. I developed a formula for my survival, and 50% is my cardiologist, Dr. Heather Ross, 12% is my compliance, and 13% is a compassionate, strong-willed wife like Mitzi to make sure I comply. And 25% is patient's attitude. And through that, I have survived. I'm here. Also, when people come into the hospital, they come in because they're sick, not lonely. So I allow no visitors other than immediate family and the odd clergy that drops by to lay a prayer on me. So anyways, I'm not sure the exact year, but Mitzi and I were scheduled to go on a cruise, and instead we ended up in the heart function clinic. I looked like Popeye. Heather looked in to the room and said, "You're not going home. You're going right into the cardiac care unit." And within an hour, I was wearing my blue-on-blue hospital gown. I had an IV in my arm. I had oxygen and a catheter, and I was under their care. Now, I was so sick. I never realized how sick I was. And that night, I went from an A-type personality down to a Z. And I told the night nurse, I'm not going to make it. I just don't have the will, the stamina. I'm not going to make it. And of course, I didn't realize it, but she put it in the chart. The next morning, in comes Heather, big smile, and I'm saying to myself, oh my God, I am going to experience the subtle wrath of Ross. And she says to me, you stop telling jokes, you lose your sense of humor, you're not getting out of here. So I said, oh, gee. I called in the charge nurse, who knew me from a previous 6-7 weeks that I spent in the ICU, and I said to her, look, I'm making a 180-degree turn. I need your help, the nurse's help, so that you can get me back to the A-type personality that I was. And so the nurses came in with big smiles, encouragement, and I started to feel a lot better. I decided I was going to climb the alphabet from Z-type personality right up to the A. And a couple of days into my little journey, I had this hallucination. Remember the cruise I had to cancel? I had this hallucination that the whole cardiac care unit were going on a cardiac cruise. And there we were, you have to imagine this, all the beds were lined up at the pier in Fort Lauderdale, and they're loading them into the ship. When my turn came, I panicked, and I must have been very, very vocal about it, because when I woke up in the cardiac care unit on the second floor, there was cardiologists on call, 2 residents and 3 nurses with unbelievable look on their face. I don't think they'd ever seen anything like this. And I woke up sort of, okay. I says, guys, I never made the cruise. And one of them said, he's okay, he's got his sense of humor back. Okay? And I spent 40 days and 40 nights in Heather's Ark. And then they decided, okay, it's time for him to move to the 5th floor cardiac ward. And can you imagine this? They open the ramp, roll my bed down from the Ark, and a beautiful rainbow appears at the foot of my bed, steering me up to the 5th floor. And when I get there, I meet new nurses and a nurse practitioner, Nadia. Now, the concept of a nurse practitioner is unbelievable. She basically the conduit from the patient up to Heather, so she basically monitored my case day to day. And every now and then I would slip down a couple of letters in the alphabet, and she was there, hold my hand, get me straight, and make me feel better. And I had a whole new audience for all my stories. I made sure every nurse that came in walked out with a big smile on their face. And one day, lying in bed, reading a book, in comes a very pretty young lady in a white doctor's coat saying Dr. So-and-so on it, no stethoscope. And I said to myself, my friends have sent in a stripper. So she introduced herself as, I'm Dr. So-and-so, I'm a resident in psychiatry. So I figured, all right, Heather sent her in. And we spent quite some time where she focused me on getting better and what my aspirations were when I got better and got discharged. And there was she didn't ask any questions. She said, let's just talk. So fine, we talked and talked and talked. But then I was waiting for that one question to happen. And sure enough, she asks it. Mr. Dickstein, she says, have you ever used recreational drugs? And I said, of course. I used Viagra, Cialis. Well, she started to laugh, big smile on her face, and she said, thank you very much, and left. Now, I don't know if I'm running past my time or whatever, but I want to close with the following. I had the pleasure of seeing Bette Midler show at the Coliseum in Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, one of my favorite spots. And she closed her show with her hit song, My Hero. And what I'd like to do is dedicate one of the verses to Heather. Do you know that you are my hero? You are all I'd ever want to be. You make me fly higher than an eagle. You are the wind beneath my wings. Ladies and gentlemen, my hero, Dr. Heather Joan Ross. I'm not finished. And in Hebrew we say, Aleha kol ha-kavod. To her goes all the credit that I'm standing before you today.
Not true.
Yes.
Not true.
Thank you.
We'll just stay.
Stay? Okay.
So we're happy to take any questions. I'm not sure, there's some people wandering around with mics, and if anybody has any questions to Al or about any of the trips, we're happy to answer any questions. Yes?
I think you know each other quite well.
We do.
Yes. And I'm more than thrilled. I don't really need it. More than thrilled to be here. I don't see you enough, but you're always in my heart.
Thank you.
Having said that, what did you use for directions to know where you were going? Because it took Moses 40 years to find out where he was going. He was too stubborn to ask for directions.
Yes, well, I am notoriously stubborn, as any of my patients and my family would certainly know. I get that from my father, who's also here. You know, the great thing, and one of the most challenging things about the trips is that you have guides who have expertise, and I'm a control freak and a AAA personality. So the great thing is that there was a guide who knew what he was doing, and the challenge for me was actually to button up and not steal the remote control, which was the GPS. You know, where are we going? Let me look, where are we going? And actually let the guide do the trip. But we had a big discussion about that actually on the first trip, because most of the people on the trip were used to being in charge. And on a mountain, there can only be one person in charge. And so it's been, that in itself has been a very interesting experience as well. And we let the guide do that. So that's actually worked. Yes?
So you're using mechanical hearts today because they're available. Is there any guidance or direction towards using stem cells?
So it's a great question, the stem cell question, and Dr. Billy is in the audience, and I could embarrass her and make her come up here and answer, but I won't do that. We have Terry Yao, who's another one. I can't tell you about all the people in our program. There are so many people, and I would spend the entire time doing that, but Terry Yao is one of the surgeons in our program. He's an incredibly gifted surgeon. He's a basic scientist, and his area of research is in stem cells. And he is just completing the follow-up of the stem cell trial for patients undergoing bypass surgery. So the patients are randomized to have their bypass surgery or bypass surgery plus stem cells, and we're waiting to see the results of that. The next phase that we're going to be doing is a stem cell trial with mechanical support. So in patients who have heart failure and need some form of definitive therapy, they will get a mechanical heart, and half of that group will get the mechanical heart and stem cells versus just the mechanical heart, to see if we can actually see some improvement, recovery, regeneration, renewal of the heart. The biggest challenge, and one of the world's experts in the area of stem cells and heart is Doris Taylor, and she would say that there's a lot of challenges that we still are facing for stem cells. So we still hold great hope. And the McEwen Center of Regenerative Medicine here does an incredible amount of work in that area. From a heart perspective, as much as people have always thought it was a simple thing, we're just glorified plumbers, in fact, the heart has to pump. It has an entire electrical wiring system. It's got valves and different types of tissues, plus it has to grow blood vessels. But when we talk about trying to repopulate or rebuild an area of heart muscle, part of the challenge isn't just putting muscle in, but making sure the muscle has a blood supply so that it can work, that it knows when it should beat, so that it's not beating in different times, but actually in a synchronized way to get output. So I think at our last meeting, there was a discussion about whether or not we would be ready for prime time in the next 10 years for stem cells and heart, and there was a great deal of debate and divide within the room of about 1,000 people. So I don't know the answer yet when it's going to happen, but we continue to work in that area, and we do hold hope for it. Yes?
If one's living with heart disease, does it necessarily go down to heart failure?
So the question is, does heart disease necessarily go to heart failure? And the answer is not necessarily. Unfortunately, though, high blood pressure is a major risk factor for heart failure and heart disease. Diabetes, which is with the growth of obesity and sedentary lifestyle in Canada, diabetes continues to grow, and diabetes is a very major risk factor both for heart disease and for heart failure. Many people who have heart disease, it can be managed medically, but after heart muscle damage or heart attacks, they can be left with a problem with the heart function. And that's why we call our program Heart Function, because I see many patients who have problems with heart function but don't yet have actual heart failure. That, and Ted Rogers said he'd never failed at anything, so he wasn't going to have it be called the Rogers Heart Failure Program. So for those two very important reasons, it's a heart function program. But we do know that, unfortunately, the natural history for many is one of progression. What we don't know is over the time frame. For any specific individual patient, the time frame can be actually quite different. And that's one of the challenges. Somebody can have a heart attack and be in heart failure at the time of the actual original heart attack. And other people might get bypassed and 30 years later still not have a problem. So that's part of what we need to understand. That's where someone like Dr. Alba, who I showed you, who's very interested in epidemiology and understanding how these things happen, why is it that some people progress and others don't? That becomes really important information. That's known as health outcomes research. Dr. Doug Lee is another huge name in that area who's one of the members of our heart function program, and that's a big area of research for us. Still important to watch your diet, exercise regularly, all of those things, part of our major purpose of Test Your Limits, and a quote from another patient, it's important to wake up every day and make the decision that your life is worth 1 hour a day, because that's actually all it takes is 1 hour a day. And many of us do other things that have no benefit. Reality TV is the first thing that comes to mind, but if you make a decision that your life is worth 1 hour a day, you will do the exercise, you can make the right choices for meals, you can take the time to prepare the meals. So I think it's a motto, Maury Rotman used that, and I think it's a motto to live by, and he's given us permission to adopt that as one of our primary mottos for our program. Sorry, from the back?
Yes. Do you see that religion and culture are going to decrease the number of donations as we expand and we become more multicultural?
Sorry, can you say that again? I missed that.
Sorry, yeah. Religious and cultural beliefs.
Yes.
Do you think this will affect the number of donations, heart donations?
Yep. So that's an excellent point. We do know that there have been, so if we look at the Metro Toronto area, we have one of the lowest organ donor rates per million population compared to, for example, London, Ontario, which has a very high organ donor rate. This is transplant organ donor rate per million population. And one of the issues that has been raised is whether or not it has to do with the multicultural, multi-religious environment that is Toronto. And what we do know is that across all religions, from Judaism through to Islam, Christianity, and Eastern religions, main spokespeople in those religions have all promoted and supported the issue of organ donation. So one of the most important things for us is to get that message out there that it is, from a religious perspective, acceptable. And I think we have a huge program that Andrea Norgate, one of our nurses in the transplant program, is doing with Vicky Ng, who's a hepatologist at Sick Kids, which is a program they've developed going into high schools to get the message in the high school about organ failure, transplant, and what can happen, and have kids bring the message to the table when they get home at night and engage in those types of discussions. Whether or not that has a significant impact on people registering to be a donor, we don't know, but we think that that's probably the better way to do it, because previous strategies, just public relations strategies, haven't really had a significant effect on organ donor rate. So we have to try new strategies. In Canada, of course, it's you have to give a choice. So you can choose not to sign or not to register. There are other countries where the choice is presumed. It's called presumed consent. And they do have much higher organ donor rates per million population. There have been members' bills that have tried to promote that, but we remain not in that situation. Yes?
One, teaching the kids about being organ donors does work.
Yep.
Both of my
signed their cards. So yes, please keep doing that. They do bring it to the table, and I feel very embarrassed that they have signed their donor cards and I haven't. And one of the reasons I haven't is a 65-year-old heart that has been through radiation for breast cancer a candidate or not?
Yeah. In all likelihood, no. We don't, so when we think about organ transplantation, livers and kidneys, there really isn't an age restriction. And Dr. Khashavji's program with the ex vivo lung, which many of you may have heard about, which is a way to resuscitate lungs before transplant, has allowed us to extend to older donors as well. In the heart program, it's a little more challenging because even though people may not have frank heart artery disease, they're all likelihood going to have some problems with the heart arteries as they age, and that in itself makes it a higher risk for that to accelerate in the transplant setting. So it's a little harder for us to use hearts from older donors. We do look because I don't think all 50, 60, and 70-year-old people are created equal. So I think that we should look, and we do look. We're actually quite aggressive about looking. But the heart's a little bit more challenging than the other organs as we age. Radiation is a risk factor for coronary artery disease, and so in all likelihood we would not. But the rest of you we'd be happy to take if that ever happened. Of course, we hope that that doesn't happen, but...
Thank you.
Yep.
Dr. Ross, I'm curious as to your ability to advise outlying hospitals and places around the world by remote television, etc.
So one of the biggest areas, and again, it's hard to cover everything that we've got going, but one of the biggest areas that we have been building over the last probably 4 years now, and is a priority from my perspective for the program over the next 5 years, is the issue of virtual clinics, management, education, monitoring, and we are working on that. So Emily Cito did her PhD with us looking at a novel remote patient monitoring system that used Bluetooth-enabled technology that was very successful. We have taken that from BlackBerry platform to a smartphone platform that we will be able to spread out a little bit more broadly. And that allows us to effectively be in the home without being in the home, but with the same kind of eagle eye in the home, because we actually can follow blood pressure, weights, and symptoms and make decisions about management, especially of water pills, remotely. We also have engaged in a large education platform, and we have one that's actually going to be rolling out very shortly that is all directed at patients, and it involves education, little tests, videos, do's, do nots, how to, and it's a very interactive, and that's a program that we're actually continuing to build on. We have a large CIHR grant looking at the role of e-counseling, so again, leveraging the internet to actually counsel patients, to provide interactive vignettes and improve awareness for patients and adherence for patients. From an education perspective, we run a large program called the Training Program in Regenerative Medicine, which is broad across all areas of organ failure. And right now that program, people take it in India, Japan, Egypt, and all over Canada, and we're continuing to expand that. So that's all through whiteboard technology and beaming that technology around the world. So it's a priority. I'd like to reduce my own carbon footprint. I can have my tree-hugging moments. But I think importantly, we have the opportunity to take our expertise and our imprimatur and actually get it out, and that's very important. So as our fellows have gone back to the countries that they came to us, we've maintained those links, both from a clinical perspective, from a research perspective, and for collaboration. So it's very important for us. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Apparently we have time for one more question.
Would you? Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, in kidney transplantation, if a person wants to donate a kidney, but the spouse overrides the wishes of the person, they do not become donors. Now, in heart transplantation, is the same thing applicable? Could the family override the donor's card? And if so, should we not spend more time informing the family of our wishes?
So it's an excellent question. In Canada, currently, even if you have signed your organ donor card, if the family overrides that wish, we will follow the wishes of the family at the time that addressing a deceased donor and a deceased donor family. Trillium has gone to great lengths to improve education and standardize approaches to families in a sensitive way, but in a way that has been shown by the Spanish, who have the highest organ donor rates per million population in the world. That has been shown as a way to help convert, if you will, which is the term that is used, from somebody who's a potential donor to an actual donor, which requires either that they have signed their organ donor card, or even if they haven't, the consent of the family. So there's a very standardized way that is approached, in a very compassionate way, to try to improve that, and we do spend a great deal of effort on that. It's an excellent question. I'm happy to stay after and answer a few questions, but I'm told that we're out of time, so I'll hand things back.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. I want to express my personal thanks to both Dr. Ross and to Mr. Dick Steen for sharing such interesting personal stories, and in such a way that allowed us to learn so much about the Heart Function Program. And also to thank all of you for being here today once again. We have information about various foundation programs at the registration table, so if there's something that you're wondering about, please stop by on your way out. If you are interested in learning more about what are some of the funding priorities for the HEART program, you can speak with, I have a few colleagues here in the audience, so Nona Phillips works with the Peter Monk Cardiac Center at Toronto General, and also Louise Aspin. If Louise could stand up, is our Vice President and Chief Development Officer at the Foundation. They can both help you, or you can speak with any of the staff. We would be more than happy to answer your questions. We had some information on the screens rotating before the presentation about some of the upcoming events we have planned. So our next behind-the-scenes lecture is going to be featuring Dr. Ed Cole, who is our physician-in-chief, in the fall. You can always speak with Rebecca Valenti, who I know many of you have had contact with over the many years, and she would be happy to assist you. So this concludes our behind-the-scenes lecture for today. Thank you once again for your very, very generous support of our hospitals. And we wish you a wonderful day. And again, I think Dr. Ross, if you still have questions, has a few minutes and would be happy to answer them for you. So thank you once again.